The Shahed drone has become one of the most iconic weapons of the war in Ukraine. Not because it's the most sophisticated, not because it's the most powerful weapon, but because it's particularly recognizable and it's being used to such devastating effect. These are Iranian made one way kamikaze attack drones. Pretty simple munitions, originally developed and manufactured in Iran. Russia started buying them in the first autumn of the war, and it's subsequently come to an agreement with Tehran where it is manufacturing them under license on Russian soil. Why have they become so important? Well, primarily because they are cheap and effective, and both Iran and Russia can produce a lot of them and send a lot of them at Ukraine to overwhelm Ukraine's air defenses. So they have a range, a variation of guidance systems, inertial, which sort of inbuilt inherent guidance systems where the drone can just detect how far it's been traveling in a certain direction. So it sort of knows where it is against a pre-designated sort of stored mapping information. And it also has GPS and other systems to try and navigate based on satellite or other navigation systems. But fundamentally, it's relatively accurate. It has a very long range, some 2,500 kilometers, and it's cheap. So whilst if they fly past or through Ukraine's air defenses, Ukraine can shoot them down. They fly relatively slowly, about 100, just over 100 miles an hour. They're not particularly small. They're 3.5 meters by about 3.5 meters, delta wing shape. They were originally grey or white to disguise them against the daylight sky, but increasingly as they've been used in nighttime strikes, we've seen them change colour. Russia now painting its variation of them, its variant called the Geran 2 black, to make them harder for Ukraine's anti-aircraft teams to spot. But they can be shot down with sort of old-fashioned anti-aircraft heavy machine guns, flat guns, the same sorts of weapons that were used to defend cities like London from the Blitz in World War II. And there's a sort of echo of World War II. Many people have compared them to the Nazi doodlebug, partly because, like the doodlebugs, these Shahed and their Russian Garan 2 equivalents have a very distinctive buzzing sound. They're propelled by a single propeller at the back. Again, relatively simple technology. I mean, some of these early variants were using parts, sort of Irish-made lawnmower parts made by a company called Tillotson, or possibly copies of parts that an Irish company called Tillotson makes. But relatively simple components put together in Iran, producing a very effective weapon. Effective, again, because it has a long range. It can carry not an enormous payload, but a significant enough payload when it's delivered accurately. And most importantly of all, its main value to Russia is it's cheap and easy to produce. So whilst Russia has been running very low on its stockpiles of its most sophisticated weapons, it can combine those more advanced cruise missiles and ballistic missiles with these much more simple Shahed weapons in its nightly waves of attacks. And so increasingly what we've seen since the Shaheds were first used in that first autumn of the war into September 2022, we increasingly see the Shaheds used in combination with other weapons. Sometimes they're used, it's a night of just Shahed strikes, but usually we see a combination of missiles and Shaheds used together. And that forces Ukraine into a difficult position in many occasions. Sometimes Ukraine will be forced to decide whether or not to expose its air defenses, because one of the tactics might be to send in the Shaheds to try and force Ukraine to reveal the location of its air defenses, to allow Russia to target those air defense batteries or to circumvent them. Now, there are many variations of the Shahed. The one that we talk about most often is the Shahed 136. That's the one I've been talking about today. There are smaller variants of it. There are specialist surveillance variants of it. And there may be new variations in Iran. We can only imagine that Iran is continuing to sort of develop this weapon. It's been used, or variations of it were first used, we think, against targets in Saudi Arabia when Iran attacked Saudi Arabia. But it's really come of age. It's really become the defining weapon, one of the defining weapons of Russia's bloodbath assault on Ukraine.
Iran has been subject to sanctions for many, many years, and the network of its smuggling operations providing material, money, and weapons to its proxies and member states is incredibly well developed. Although it's quite large and sinister, it was relatively easy to transport and assemble and build, and it makes it easier on Iran to send these drones around the world to its proxies and allied terror states. Iran has provided at least 6,000 of these drones to Russia. The Russians have tried to rebrand this drone as the Geran-2, which means geranium-2. In addition, the Russians have begun a homegrown manufacturing of this drone based upon Iranian design, Iranian technology, including Iranian parts, mimicking this exact Shahed. This weapon, deployed across the Middle East from the Red Sea to Saudi Arabia to the UAE to Israel to American forces in Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, into Europe and Ukraine, it is delivered throughout Iran and its proxies and to its allied terror states, and it rains terror on peoples, friends and allies of the United States across the region and throughout Europe. It is, in my opinion, the terror weapon of the day. We brought this drone to the United States and are revealing it publicly to show the true face of the Iranian regime. I believe that there are sanctioned parts within this drone. This is an off-the-shelf weapon system. Maybe the airframe is unique to the Iranians as well, but it is built and powered by mechanisms that we think are available for purchase throughout the West, and that there are Western components within this drone. We hope to understand that, identify those products, and stop the Iranians from having the ability to acquire those elements of this drone.